Welcome to Chamber University. Today is my privilege to bring to you Andre Boykin with Leadership's Effectiveness in the COVID-19 Era. It's my privilege to introduce a person with 25 years, has dedicated his professional life to the development of human potential. He is noted for his ability to connect with people and move them to take action. Because he combines his experiences and learning points with humor to create a message that resonates, educates, and entertains his audience, he is sought after by associations and corporations to speak at their events. In addition to being a highly sought-after speaker, he is also an accomplished author, as evidenced by his books Masterminds Unleashed, Selling for Geniuses, and the soon-to-be released The 5 C's of Winning Posture. His consulting company, Capital Idea, has worked with thousands of leaders to help them transform their organizations such that new levels of productivity and results are attained. He also influences the lives of many people through his executive coaching programs, books, CDs, and DVDs. We're excited that he's with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andre Boykin.
All right. Thank you, Robert. And it's great to be with you here at the Chapter University. And just a couple of things before we get started. As I go through my presentation, you may have some questions, and just pop those into the chat. And we're going to take time to answer questions and to see if there's anything out there that needs to be maybe delved into a little bit deeper. So we have an intimate group, so feel free to ask questions and make sure that you leave this session with at least 1 or 2 ideas that's going to make a difference in your effectiveness in leadership during this COVID-19 era. When we speak about this COVID-19 era, one of the things that comes to mind is that it's an era of disruption, and it's a little bit different than what we would normally consider as change, because change is kind of planned for it a little bit. You have the processes in place to maybe lead people through change. But disruption is when there is a break, a total break in the normal process of things. And that's what we have had, is a total break in the normal process. So what we're left with is new ways of working and getting results in this COVID-19 era. So that's what this presentation is all about. And so what we're going to be covering are 5 dimensions to lead effectively amid this disruption that we have in this COVID-19 era. The first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the mindset. And the mindset, I call it the inner game of leadership. And it is impossible to master the outer game of leadership, which is communication and goal setting and all the other things that we might think of as being a leader. It is impossible to master that until we have mastered the inner game, because the inner game leads to the effectiveness of our outer game. So we're going to be discussing the mindset. And then we're going to look at what is it we should be focusing on in this time of COVID-19, in this disruption that we have. What do we need to be looking at? And then we're going to be looking at people-centered, the leader's role in being people-centered, and what that means actually, and how to cause people-centered leadership. And then we're going to talk about results, and we're going to look at results and why as such, especially during this time of disruption, to really know what results we are up to achieving. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at communication. And I don't think you can have any kind of leadership conversation, especially talk about being effective as a leader, without having a conversation about communication. So we're going to do that. So let's get right into a little poll here. And, seeing how we have, Robert, we just have like two people on. So why don't we just share? The question that I have is, what's the biggest leadership challenge you face in this crisis? Is it communication, mindset, being people-centered, maintaining focus, or getting desired results? So pick the one that most resonates with you in terms of your biggest challenge. And then maybe we'll have someone share around that as well. Okay. So Robert, how we doing? We should have everybody in by now.
Yeah, we do have some polling going on right now. It's maintaining focus seems to be the number one.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so would anybody like to share around that? You can just, can they unmute themselves,
They can
Robert,
unmute
or
themselves,
can they
yeah.
raise their hand? Okay, awesome. So who would like to share? Okay, Sil?
Sure, I'll share. So in my business, we have been able to transition online amazingly, and it has actually given us an opportunity to expand and to work. I'm working in other states that I wasn't working before, so it has somewhat helped. But at the same time, it's hard to maintain focus because there's so much going on and so many new things, and I want to keep doing the things that I know give me success. But I struggle a little bit with that, and I feel that the people that I lead may be struggling with that too.
Okay. Well, awesome. So thank you for sharing that. And so when we get to the focus area, make sure that any concern that you have gets answered, in that section. Okay. All right then. Okay. Robert, is there anything that you want to say around the biggest challenge you face in this COVID-19 era?
Sure. I think also staying focused, I think because there was just so much insecurity, and really we just didn't know what the future was going to hold when this was all announced. It was just such a sudden and drastic, like you said, used the word drastic before. It was such a drastic change for everybody. I think for many, it put many like in freeze mode where you just didn't know when to step out, when it was right to step out, even whether you're just going to the market or whether you're going to step out in your work environment. And so I think that climate just led for a lot of insecurity. And on my end, as a coach, I just I got no response for people wanting to be part of any of the mastermind groups that I was holding, and I just just pulled totally back and decided, well, the one thing I know I can do for people is I can pray for people. So I'll focus on that for a little while and see what happens for the next next couple months. So. Yeah. Not being able to stay focused on where I was moving and where I felt that the business was working. A couple clients that I was working with, they haven't gotten back to me on following up with some agreements that we had put in place at the beginning of the year. So just a lot of insecurity on where to move forward.
Sure, gotcha. Okay, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I totally get it. And I would say I know those prayers were appreciated. And there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and still is, about where we go from where we are today. Okay, we live in a VUCA world, and this term VUCA, you may have heard of it before. It was coined by a man by the name of Warren Bennis, and it was part of his theory of effective leadership. And he coined this in 1987 when he was with the U.S. Army War College in Washington, D.C. And what it stands for is volatility, which is the dynamics around change. And then the U stands for uncertainty. And we're talking about the surprise element, the lack of being able to predict what is going to happen. And then there is the complexity, which is the confounding of the issues. And also there's ambiguity. And I think if we were to look at and say, okay, if we were living in a VUCA world in 1987, it's like, on steroids right now, because we have, this whole amount of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And, in each of these pieces, for example, like ambiguity, which is the haziness of reality, which means that we could misread something because we're not sure of, what it actually is. There's what is apparent, and then there's what is actual, and those might not always equal the same thing. So we live in this VUCA world that's really on steroids. And so then when we have these kinds of time, these disruptive times, what they do is they really reveal and expose the effectiveness of leadership. When things are going along sort of status quo kind of thing, we tend to get in a routine and produce results, almost out of just following the routine and getting in a pattern. Now we're faced with a whole unique set of circumstances and challenges. And now leadership is exposed and revealed because now it really requires a leader to be effective to produce results in these times. And so it's like William Shakespeare said, that life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And so that's, from a leadership perspective, that's what has to happen. The circumstances that we have around the COVID-19, they are not going away. And each day brings on new circumstances. For example, now we're starting the kind of reemergence or opening up phase regarding the economy. And it is going to create another set of challenges as we reopen. So it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. If we're waiting for this thing to pass, it could be quite a while. So we got to learn how to dance in this situation. So what we're going to start off with, looking at beginning how we become effective in dancing in this situation, is looking at the mindset. And when I speak of mindset, I'm talking about these habitual ways of thinking that we have. And these habitual ways of thinking are created over time. In fact, a lot of the mindsets that we have now were actually created when we were younger, and we continued over time just to simply reinforce those habitual ways of thinking. And from a leadership perspective, and what we want to be concerned with is that the mindset that we have causes the actions that we do. So we have a habitual way of thinking about something, and then those habitual ways of thinking are acted out in the actions that we do every day. And this mindset, it makes up what we call our identity. Some people call it our ego, but it makes up our identity. And remember when I said, until we really master the inner game of leadership, we won't be able to master the outer game of leadership. And so our identity then really determines the effectiveness of our leadership. So what we want to do then, from a leadership perspective, is to raise the consciousness of our leadership, be aware of our identity. So what we're going to look at are the stages of the evolution of consciousness. And this is work that was done by Dr. Robert Keenan. He's a professor at Harvard University. And his work and his study as a psychologist, it was around how does the human mind develop, and which leads to why do people do what they do. And especially from a leadership perspective, that's what his work. So we're going to be looking at 4 stages. Stage 2, which is the imperial mind. We're going to look at stage 3, the socialized mind. Stage 4, the self-authoring mind. And stage 5, the self-transforming mind. Now, we're not going to look at stage 1 because stage 1 is like prior to 6 years old. So we're not going to look at that stage, okay? So stage 2, the imperial mind. Now the imperial mind is from 6 years to adolescence. And now some adults, though, never, get past this stage. And as we go through these stages, kind of visualize where you think you are and what stage. And it's not necessary to say that you're always in one stage. You could vacillate, say, between stages 3 and 4, between 4 and 5, or, so it's not like, okay, I'm always in one stage. You can go between stages depending upon the circumstance or situation. But stage 2 is from 6 years to adolescence. And as I mentioned, some adults are still in stage 2. And in stage 2, what marks it is that people view people as a means to get their own needs met. And the emphasis is on their own needs, interests, and agenda versus the needs of others. And you stop and think about, if you have teenagers or have had teenagers or know someone who has teenagers or has had teenagers, you'll know that it is all about them, right? And, like, well, can you take me to the soccer game? Can you pick me up? Can you drop me off at the party? Can you get this dinner ready? It's all about them. And it's not that they are selfish, or as far as that's concerned, it's not that they're even inconsiderate. What it is their consciousness has not risen above this level of the imperial mind. Okay, so I don't want you to come away from this thing and thinking that, well, teenagers are just a selfish group. That's not what I'm speaking to. What I'm speaking to, though, is their level of consciousness. Now, you stop and think about, well, what if a leader was actually in stage 2? Wow, that would really be a disaster, because that leader then would be looking out for their own interests and would care less about the interest of anybody else, because they simply view people as a means to get their own needs met. Okay, so that's stage 2. Stage 3 is the socialized mind, and this is where most adults are in this stage stage 3, which is the socialized mind. And in this stage is characterized by a person gets their identity from the norms and ideas and beliefs of people and the systems around them. So it's these external sources that shape their sense of self, or who they know themselves to be. It's shaped by those external things and their understanding of the world. So their sense of self, or their identity, comes from the outside in. So when we have a leader that's in the socialized mind, and remember, most adults are in the socialized mind. When we look at this COVID-19 era, this era of disruption, there are some really, really tough decisions that have to be made. And if the leader has the consciousness at this level, at stage 3, they might be, in fact, they will be more concerned about, well, what will someone else think if I make this decision? How will they view me if I make this decision? Because see, who they get their sense of self from is from the outside. Okay? So stage 4 now then is the self-authoring mind. And in the self-authoring mind, that have the ability to distinguish those viewpoints and opinions of others from their own in terms of formulating their own opinions and their sense of identity. So they're consumed with who they are, and this is the kind of person I am, and this is what I stand for. And so the internal sense is, it gives them the direction and the capacity to create and follow their own course. That is generated internally. So the distinction between stage 3 and stage 4, stage 3 is from the outside in, and stage 4 is I can consider what is out there, and I develop my sense of self internally. So one of the things about stage 4, if we're looking at it from a leadership perspective, stage 4, they know exactly where they want to go and they know how they're going to get there, and they're moving forward toward that. And their identity, though, is wrapped up in that. Okay. So if something threatens who they know themselves to be, that's created internally, they will then obviously resist that. Okay. So that's stage 4, the self-authoring mind. And then there's stage 5, which is the highest level of consciousness. And only about 1% of adults reach stage 5. And that's interesting, because I'm going to ask you the same question, like, what stage do you think you're in? And I get all, oh, I'm in stage 5. Well, probably not true. Okay, okay, all right. And in stage 5 is one's sense of self is not tied to particular identities or roles, and both self-authorizing and willing to work with the authority of others or those outside. So in the self-transforming mind, what is brought to each situation is created in that situation. So they're not tied to, this is who I am. They have the ability to say, this is who I am in this situation. I can be and create myself uniquely in another situation. So that sense of self is not tied to particular identities or roles. So that is the self-transforming mind. So the question, and they're no longer held prisoner by their own identity. That's one of the key things. They're not constrained by that, because, if I was to ask you to, and I will say, hey, Robert, we're going to unmute everybody, and we're going to call on, everybody to sing their favorite song. And if I was to say that, immediately, you would go through a thought process and you would have something that's interacting with your identity. And it may sound like this, I don't sing, something like that, and so that's what I mean by bumping up against your identity. So when you have circumstances that bump up against who you know yourself to be, that causes that resistance and less effectiveness as a leader. And what actually happens is we become reactive versus creative. So we think about the mindset that's needed now is we need a mindset that is creative, which is coming from the self-transforming mind, the ability to create who we are in any given situation, versus reactive, which is a default. It's a default. So consider that we have a default. Something happens, boom, we have a default. Something triggers us or whatever, we have a default. And that is a natural part of being a human being. And once we have observed that we're in that default, we then have the ability to create. And so when we think about these two paths that we have, from a leadership perspective, we want to be on the creative side, creating ourselves newly in each situation so that we can really be effective based on the circumstances that are not encumbered by who we have created ourselves to be, or our identity, which is from the past. Okay, so now is an opportunity to have a little poll here. So we're going to have the poll. What is your leadership style? Are you creative 100% of the time, 75% of the time, 50% of the time, 25% of the time, less than 25% of the time? So just answer right away. Okay, and we should be through.
Surprisingly, we're not.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm thinking we're about as done as we're going to get, because
we got creative 75% of the time.
Okay, all right then. Awesome, awesome. That's very, very good. And because that's what we need. Okay, so I'm just gonna check in. Would anybody like to share around that about anything we just covered so far? Phil?
I'd like to share.
Okay, go
Um,
for it.
I remember, you know, as you talk about this, I definitely remember at times in my life when I was kind of all wrapped up in my identity as my external was what all I cared about, and how I came across and how people were looking upon me. And that was what was driving me because I didn't have much of a spine of my own. And then, you know, and then through a series of events that, you know, when you kind of come and realize that God's got a purpose for you, you kind of allow yourself to come before Him just as you are. And so that helps you get to know, and it works in layers. They kind of, I guess, all these habits that we've had over the years and the way we are, you know, they all don't go away overnight, but it's definitely a transformation, and it's definitely takes time. But I definitely am in a better place today than I ever have been. It shows up in my laughter and my being able to become light with things, with my marriage and in other areas. And I just think life is just such a blessing now, that I do get a chance to kind of think through and create where I want to be, what I want to do with my life. And it's really awesome.
Okay, great, Robert. Thank you very much. And, you know, if you're looking at it from a biblical perspective, you know, it's just like it says in Romans, you know, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. If you want to apply a scriptural, you know, piece to that, you know, it's the exact same thing that what Dr. Keenan was talking about is don't have your identity shaped from the outside in, but from the inside out. So thank you for sharing. Sil, you actually unmuted first, but Robert jumped in there. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
That's all right.
So I love this idea, this concept that you brought up of, you know, when your circumstances make you bump into your own identity. A few years ago, I was director of software development. So I was working 9-hour days behind a computer, coming home to work overtime, sitting down on the computer. My human interaction was none. And then I transitioned into working in finances and leading a team of people that want to do the same, and having my own office and training people, and had to completely go out of my comfort zone. And boy, did I bump into my identity, because that was just not me.
Right.
But I saw the value of the transition, and I definitely see it in the people that I'm trying to help kind of do the same.
Okay.
So this expression of bumping into your identity is something that helps a lot.
Yeah.
To kind
Yeah.
of transmit that idea.
Yeah. Whenever we're put in a situation where it's saying this is not who I know myself to be, that's going to cause some resistance. That is great. Now, see, once you distinguish that, right? Once you can really distinguish that, that's where the practice comes in. Then you can actually move to being creative, and like really ignoring that voice that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not this, or I'm not that, right? Okay, all right, very good. Okay, so let's move on. And let's talk about, you know, how we're operating right now. We're going to talk about this really fast. You know, there are two pieces we come from. We talked about reactive and creative. And, you know, when we're reacting, we said that was our primal. No, we didn't actually say that. We said that was our default, which is coming from the primal part of our brain, which that's the default. We don't have to think about that. If you're walking in the woods and run across a bear, you don't even have to think about running. I mean, it's just like, even though you can't outrun a bear, you know, it's just like, I'm running, right? And you don't have to go through some, you know, lengthy algorithm or anything like that to figure out you need to run. It's like, boom, right there, because there is danger. And that's the purpose of the primal brain, to keep us safe, okay? But a lot of times we perceive something as dangerous that's not actually dangerous. You know, like the number one fear that people have, by far, by the way, is the fear of public speaking. And I can tell you that people actually perceive it as being dangerous when there's nothing, absolutely nothing dangerous about public speaking. Now, unless you're speaking on a controversial subject before a hostile crowd, I guess, you know, that could be dangerous, but that's not the case for most people, okay? So the brain is designed to keep us safe when we come from this primal state, and we have to recognize, though, what is a real danger and what we perceive to be as danger. And our creative then is when we're in the powerful state. It's actually moves it from the primal part of our brain to the prefrontal cortex, which is where our intellect is, our creativity is. And these powerful states that exude hope, gratitude, joy, compassion, and so forth. And when we're operating inside of that, our leadership raises to a whole new level of effectiveness, because people get who we are in those situations, that we're not over here, you know, stressed, angry, overwhelmed, rage, irritation, trying to dominate, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the mindset. Master the inner game, and you can master the outer game. Okay, so we invest a lot of time on that because that's the most important part. You know, the inner game is the most important part. But let's move on and talk about focus. And there are a couple of things that we need to really focus on in this COVID-19 era. And the first thing is culture. We need to focus on culture. And there are three things that we want to focus on as it relates to the kind of culture. Now, these are not the only things we can focus on. And these are the three most important things that we must have in our culture in order to be successful from a leadership perspective. Now, let me define what I mean by culture so that at least we're singing out of the same hymn book on that. Culture is the norms and behaviors that exist in the organization. So every organization has a culture. Now, the question is it the culture you want or not? That's the question. Every organization's culture. So what I'm saying is, have at least these three things as part of the culture. And the first thing is trust. The first thing is trust. And what I mean by trust is that everyone on the team knows that everyone else on the team has their back. So it's not like I got to be concerned about looking around to see if, you know, what's happening, because I know everyone has my back. I know that I can speak freely and candidly because I trust my team members that they're not going to retaliate against me, because everybody has everybody else's back. So creating trust, that has to be one of the things for the culture in this time. The next thing is purpose. It's purpose. You know, in a business, business has customers and provide either a service or product for that customer. And if we're not careful, we can almost get in the status quo of just going through a series of motions to actually perform that, whether it's a service or provide a product. When we have a purpose, it goes beyond that. It's like the why we are in business. This is how we impact the world. This is how we make a difference. There's a higher level of purpose than just, oh, we provide this for our customers. We're making a difference for them in unique ways. We allow them to do this. We allow them to achieve their goals and objectives for their customers. And so the purpose then becomes something that unites the entire team. So if we have everybody's back and we're united behind this common cause of a purpose, then we have a very powerful powerful, powerful culture. And then the last piece that we must have in this COVID-19 era are values and core beliefs as a part of our culture. The values and core beliefs, they are the guide rails of how we're going to do business. And that is both for our external customers and our internal customers, or our employees or our team members. So our core values and beliefs, they determine who we are, and who we are then determines what we do. You know, back in 1987, I guess that's been a great year since 1987. But anyway, that's been a while ago. But what happened with Tylenol in 1987 was there was a series of deaths that were related to Tylenol capsules. And what had happened was some person who was obviously mental deranged was putting cyanide inside of these capsules, and several people died. And it was all around, the Chicago, the Illinois area there. None really outside of that, because it was just with one person. But Tylenol, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson, they made the decision that they were going to recall all of the Tylenol capsules everywhere in the United States. It cost $100 million. Now, this was back in 1987, when $100 million was really $100 million, as they say. And when they asked the CEO about this, was it a hard decision for you to make to recall all of these capsules at this enormous amount of money? And of course, their market share plummeted from like 31% all the way down into the low single digits. And he said, no, it wasn't a hard decision at all, because we decided a long time ago, and it's a part of who we are, that we place the needs of our customers first. And so when you have core values and beliefs, they become the guide rail. It makes decision making easy, because you say, well, is this in harmony with my core values, or is it not in harmony with my core values? Okay, so those are the three things: trust, purpose, and core values. Focus on the culture. The next thing that we want to focus on is we want to focus on and make sure that we focus on the job to be done and not the crisis. I mean, it would be really, really easy to sit around and talk about the crisis all day, because there is enough material out there to really talk about it all day. Well, we got a vaccine. We got a vaccine. I don't think we got a vaccine. Will we have a vaccine? I may have a vaccine. They're doing some work on a vaccine. Yeah. But can you get it if somebody just rubs their hand across? And so it's easy. I see still laughing at that. But it's easy to get into like really losing focus on what there is to be done and focusing on the crisis. So from a leadership perspective, we have to keep that focus on the job to be done and not on the crisis. So this is going to maybe frame the context of how we know what we want to focus on. And so this was developed by Stephen Covey. And we have these 4 quadrants. And on the left side, we have what is not important and important. And across the top, we have what is urgent and not urgent. And so if we look at the lower right quadrant, which is not important and not urgent, these would be like the trivial kind of things that we have, the time wasters, television, it could be some phone calls, or at least some phone calls can degenerate into not important and not urgent, such as talking about the crisis, right? So obviously this is a quadrant that we want to stay away from. And then there is the not important but urgent. And that has to do with the interruption. Somebody comes into the office and says, we got this going on. These are distractions. It could be some emails and it could be some routine acts. They could be not important and urgent. And then we have in the upper right-hand quadrant, we have not urgent and important. And this has to do with the preparation, the planning, the prevention. I should put execution in here, personal development. All of these things are important and they're not urgent. And then we have the urgent and important. And that has to do with, this is a crisis. These are pressing issues. We have these deadlines. We have these emergency meetings. These are the things that are urgent and important. So the question then becomes, I think this is what Sil was getting to, is where do we focus our time? Where do we focus our time? Well, what we want to focus our time is on the upper right-hand quadrant, which is the important and not urgent. And the more time that we can put into this quadrant, the more effective we're going to be. If we can plan and execute the plan and look at what's prevention and preparation, then that's going to allow us to be successful. Because if we don't invest time, most of our time, in this important and not urgent category, what happens is what is in that quadrant will go over to the urgent and important category, our quadrant. And that's where we get into the crisis, pressing issues, deadline. You stop and think about what the virus has exposed. Hospitals didn't have a plan, nor did they execute or implement a plan for the type of equipment that they would need for this virus. And so then it became urgent and important. Whereas wouldn't it have been better to have been over in the upper right hand quadrant and being executed on that, which is important, while it was not yet urgent? So when you're looking at what there is to do, like what the job is to do, what the business has to do, look and see what are the important things and they're not urgent, so that we can focus on those things. And eventually, sometimes when things are not important and urgent, they can move to important stuff as later on. But the whole idea is to be focused in this upper right hand quadrant, which is important and not urgent. Okay. All right, let's move on. Let's talk. Sil, I wanted to make sure, did you get something like a takeaway that was beneficial? Okay, gotcha. Okay, good. Okay. All right then. All right, let's talk about being people-centered. All right then, because from a leadership perspective, we have to recognize it's not all about us as leaders. It's not all about us as leaders. And so what we want to do when we talk about being people-centered is get out of ourselves, or get ourselves out of the way, if you will, so that we can really focus on what's important, and that's other people, okay? And here again, in order for us to really be people-centered, we have to have a level of consciousness that allows us to operate in being being people-centered. What people are looking for right now is certainty. They're looking for certainty. Now, the interesting thing about that is that you can never find certainty. But from a leadership perspective, we want to create the feeling of certainty. Because let's look at it this way. 2.5 months ago, or whenever it was, but just before this virus started, say February 15th, we would probably say, hey, I'm pretty certain about how things are, right? Woke up the next morning and there was no certainty whatsoever, right? Now, you stop and think about it. February 15th, we really didn't have any certainty, because whenever we woke up and found that there was no certainty, we had that could have existed back on February 15th. So there really is no certainty. However, though, from a leadership perspective, we are creating the sense of certainty. And all it means is, from a leadership perspective, because you can't predict the future, all it is that people on your team, they know that you got this. no matter what it is. They got it. So if we have, people come down with the virus in our workplace, if we lose business, whatever, no, our leaders have got this. Okay, that's what they're looking for. And so the leader then has to really understand how to convey that they got this to their team. And it's not like this puffed up, pride, arrogant kind of thing. It's like, I got this, and I want you to know that I got this so that you don't have to worry about that. Okay? It's like being over there with them, because people are fearful. And it's the same thing, that you want to alleviate their fears in that, I got this. I got this. So the other piece about being people-centered is we need to be sensitive to individual needs. Now, we had people working remotely from home for a while. That in a lot of instances, what used to be a perk, which was like working from home, used to be a perk. You say, can I work from home? Yeah, you can work from home 2 days a week, okay? And that was like, yes, a perk, right? Now, in the COVID-19 era, it was like a necessity, right? And then we're kind of opening up, and we'll see. But a lot of businesses are looking at it and say, you know what? Things worked out pretty good while we have people working from home. We might need to tweak this or fine tune this, but we have all this overhead associated with this space. Man, we might not need to have that. And so we want to be sensitive to individual needs, because people who are working remotely, especially now, kids are at home, too. It's not like they're back in school. So, you got the 2-year-old running through the house, and all that going on, right? They're trying to get their work online. You're trying to get your work online. It's a whole set of circumstances. And also, too, some people work better remotely and some don't. And that's going to be on an individual basis. Some people like coming into the office and being around other people. So we want to be sensitive to the individual needs. And one of the things we want to make sure of, that whether they're coming into the office or whether people are working remotely, that they have the resources that they need to be successful. So, what resources look like today is dramatically different than what resources looked like maybe 2.5 months ago. Because we need to have maybe a certain kind of equipment. Maybe we need to have testing. All of these resources that we, didn't consider, hand sanitizers, masks, gloves. We got to have all of those kinds of resources available for our team members. Okay, and then also to provide them the proper training that they need. My wife was in Trader Joe's, and I don't go anywhere because I have a compromised immune system, and so I just stay at home. And but my wife goes out, and it's really no difference if she goes out and catches it and brings it home. But anyway, I guess it's it's kind of like that certainty thing. We just want to feel like certain, right? But anyway, though, she was in Trader Joe's, and she was telling me this story about a lady. And Trader Joe's is doing a great job with the social distancing. They're only letting so many people in the store, and then they got the 6-foot markers, to wait outside. A really good system from what I understand. And this lady was in the store, and she had her mask, but she didn't have it covering her nose and mouth. And the associate there at Trader Joe's said, "Ma'am, we require all of our customers to wear a mask in the store." And the lady refused to put on the mask. Now, and so the associate didn't know what to do, right? Like, hey, like I told her, now she says no. I mean, what are we gonna do? Take this to the street? I mean, but anyway, the point being is that she hadn't been trained on, well, how do you handle a situation when you ask somebody to put on their mask and they say, I'm not putting on the mask. I mean, you're not born knowing that, right? You don't come out of the womb knowing that. You have to be trained on that. So we want to make sure that and obviously she was in an awkward situation, like, well, what the heck do I do, right? Because she has a concern for the other, store patrons and so forth. So we want to make sure that people have the training that they need. And I use that as an example around the COVID, but it's also an example around, well, what training is needed and how we're going to be interacting with customers going forward. You know, are we going to be doing more virtual meetings versus in-person meetings with customers? Then we need to be trained on that. How do we do that? How do we accomplish those goals? So we want to be sensitive to those individual needs, that we're giving them what they need to be successful. And that's a part of our leadership. And then, of course, there is the concept of authority versus power. And I'm going to hit on this. This is one of the key things here as it relates to being people-centered. When I speak of authority versus power, I'm speaking to that authority is granted. A person has authority just by base. I'm the owner of the company. That's my title, owner. That comes with a certain amount of authority. I have this position. I'm a director. I'm a vice president. You have authority that's granted because you have that position. So authority is granted. Power, on the other hand, is earned. And power is the ability to move people. The ability to move people. And so let me give an illustration. I have 2 boys, and thank God they're grown and out the house. But, I just had my first grandchild 2.5 weeks ago. Her name is Malia Rose Boykin. My oldest son has a daughter. Thank you very much. And I tell you, she's got me wrapped around her little finger. And I haven't even held her yet. I mean, you know, so, but anyway, though, we'll talk about that more later, maybe. But you know, teenagers. Yeah, I mentioned if you hadn't had it, you probably know somebody who's had some. But anyway, imagine this scenario, because something happens when teenagers get to be 16. They get this privilege to drive. And it's very nerve-wracking for the parents, but it's very exciting for the kids, right? And but imagine this scenario. You have one kid who is kid A, and they're, you know, very, very responsible. They do well in school. They have a great circle of friends and acquaintances. They take care of their responsibilities around the house. They do what they say they're going to do, so they have integrity. And so when they come and ask their parents for the car because they want to go to a party this coming Friday, and they say it's going to be over Ralph's house, it's going to start about 9, we're going to end about 12:30, I'll be home, you know, at that time. You know, now the parents might have a couple of questions, but the answer is probably going to be, yeah, you can use the car. Now you take person, because they've earned that power. Now you take teenager B, not very responsible, doesn't have a good circle of friends, doesn't do well in school, doesn't handle their responsibilities around the house. They go to their parents and they say, can I borrow the car? Ralph is having a party on Friday night from 9 to, you know, sometime. And you can imagine what the parents are going to say. Because, see, I run a PG program here, so I can't begin to repeat what the parents are going to say. So, but you get the idea. That child has not earned the right, see, has not earned the right. They don't have any power with their parents. So we want, from a leadership perspective, we want to be able to move people with power. We don't want to be, you know, I used to, you know, my mother used to tell me to do something, and I would ask her why, and her immediate response, I mean, it was like a comeback, it was almost like automatic. I just got to have her ask her why so I could hear her say it. She said, because I said so. You know, now that's authority. Now, my mother was very authoritarian. I just want to put that in there. But and God rest her soul, she was really authoritarian. But that's what we're saying we don't want to be, because we want to be people-centered. We want to use power to move people. And let me tell you, the number one ingredient to gain power with your team, and that's to have integrity. Do what you say you're going to do. If you do what you say you're going, there are other things, but this is the main thing is to do what you say you're going to do, and you'll have power. Okay? All right, then. All right, so let's have a poll. And let's talk about your biggest challenge around being people-centered. And so, Robert, if you'll flash that up there for us. Okay, so move quickly to answer. And so we should be complete, Robert, by now, shouldn't we?
Yep. Creating creativity.
Oh, creating certainty.
Certainty, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, it takes a certain amount of creativity to create certainty, that's for sure. So yes, creating certainty. And, you know, and it's probably the biggest challenge that we're all facing because, you know, like Robert was saying there, and it really it's perfect about creativity. It does take a little creativity for us to create this certainty. And because everybody has just a little bit different concern, you know, about what is happening, a little bit different ways that they're expressing their uncertainty about what has happened. You have some people say, well, I'm uncertain about my economic future. Other people are more concerned about their health future. More people are concerned about the health of others' future. You see, so some people are concerned about, well, you know, is my kid going to get the scholarship if we don't have sports next year? You know, so all of these kinds of things, and are they even going to have scholarships, you know, anymore? You know, so for sports, yeah. So there are all of these different things that, you know, different people have for uncertainty. So what it's going to require is for us to really get to know our team members at a new level, really get to know them at a new level. And that's really the only way we can be people-centered is when we get over there with them, like get our own selves out the way and get over there with them. Okay. All right then. Awesome. Okay, so let's move on because we got a few more things that we really want to talk about that can make a difference in being effective in our leadership in this era of COVID-19. So the next piece is results orientation. You know, still the number one thing or characteristic of great leadership is the ability to produce results. And it's, you know, nobody wants to know about, you know, what happened that caused the results not to be produced. That's kind of like the whole story around something. You know, what really the bottom line and where the rubber meets the road, as they say, is, you know, did we do what we were set out to do, or did we not do what we said we set out to do? So there are a couple of things to keep in mind as we go along here. The first thing is we don't want to collapse activity with accomplishment. We don't want to collapse activity with accomplishment. And let me put this way. There have been days maybe that, wow, you just said, man, I was so busy today. I did this, I did that, I did this and that. And I was just busy all day. And then you stop and think about, well, what really though did I get done? And you were very active and maybe you didn't accomplish as much as you really wanted to accomplish. And so in this time of disruption, this time of COVID-19, we could really get hung up on collapsing activity with accomplishment. Boy, I did a lot of stuff. I did a lot of stuff. Well, what was the result that you produced? And especially if you have teams that are working remotely. I was talking with someone who's in charge of a sales team, and we're talking about how do you hold people accountable who are working remotely. And they were saying, well, you know, we're requiring, you know, our people to make, you know, this many calls and this many virtual meetings and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, that's what we're holding them accountable to. And I said, well, what results are you seeking from all of that activity? And then it was kind of like, you know, so we want to be clear on what the activity is leading to. What is the activity designed to produce in terms of a result? Because after all, if you're clear on what the result is that you want, do you really care what activities that it takes to get there? For some people, it might take 3 meetings. For others, it might take 5. If they get it done in 3, do you really care if they're producing the results that you want them to produce? I would say no. So now with salespeople, it's a little bit different, because salespeople, if the commission structure is right, they're always going to keep working, because they're designed to make more money. That's what salespeople are. But the point I'm trying to make is that we don't want to collapse activity with accomplishment. And then, of course, then we need to have clear goals and objectives. I mean, everyone on the team needs to know exactly what the expectation is. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more, about how to communicate that. But we first have to determine what those goals and objectives are. Now, they could look completely different than what they looked like before we got into this new era, because everything has shifted. So, for example, there's less opportunity to be able to have meetings. There's, so many other things involved. So we want to make sure that we have clear goals and objectives for right now, what's happening right now. So we want to make sure that that's there. And then from a leadership perspective, we want to demonstrate the how so the what gets accomplished. We want to demonstrate the how so the what gets accomplished. And so this gets back almost to being people-centered, so that people really understand that you got their back. Let me show you what we're looking for, how to go about it, so that what we are up to gets accomplished. So that's what, from a leadership perspective, that's what we're tasked to do. So we can keep these three things in mind. It's going to raise our effectiveness in order to produce the results that we want to have. And then there is communication. And, I mentioned earlier, there can't have a leadership effectiveness conversation without having a conversation about communication, because communication is what I call is the exchange of ideas. You have a sender and you have a receiver, and in order for there to be communication, the receiver has to get it in the same way that the sender meant for it to be gotten. And if that doesn't happen, what you have is miscommunication. So communication only exists when there is an exchange of ideas, where the receiver gets it the same way that the sender meant for it to be gotten. And that's communication. Now, I know we have texting and email and all of that, and that is messaging. A lot of times I'll ask my coaching clients, my executive coaching clients, and I'll say, well, did you communicate that? And they'll say, yes, I sent an email. And so I'll ask again, well, did you communicate that? And then they'll say, well, I sent an email. And then I'll say, well, did you communicate that? And then they say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, did the sender get it the same way that you meant for it to be gotten? And then they go, oh, I sent an email. Well, that was a message. And don't get me wrong, I understand the place and the time and the need for messaging, okay? And we can't collapse that messaging equals communication. I used the illustration. You take these words, I didn't say you stole the money. Now, if I place the emphasis on either one of those words, it completely changes the meaning of that sentence. I didn't say you stole the money. 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 Now, all of that means something different, doesn't it? Now, imagine putting that in an email or a text. The chances of there being miscommunication in that scenario are very high. So we have to have this exchange of ideas. receiver gets it the same way that the sender meant for it to be gotten. So we have the words that are involved, we have the tone of the words, we have the emotions that are associated with it, and the emotions are wrapped around our identity as well. It's how I feel the other person feels about my ideas, and it's how the other person feels about my ideas, or how they think that I feel about their ideas. So all of that goes into whether communication is going to be effective or not. Okay. So then, so that's kind of like a background then. Let's talk about what there is to communicate in this time of COVID-19. The first thing is communicate the what and the how. Communicate the what and the how. We talked about demonstrating the how so the what gets done. Well, all that has to be inside of a communication. Communicate the what and the how. And we want to support discovery. And I mean, we could spend the next 2 hours talking about this one thing about supporting discovery. And so I'm just going to give you an example of what I'm speaking to. Leadership is not about telling somebody something. Leadership is about having someone discover something for themselves. So you say, well, Andre, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that the leader becomes great at asking questions that lead to a conclusion from the other person. So let me give you an example. So if someone comes and says, well, how do I do that? Almost, I can guarantee, almost, because I coach a bunch of executive coaching clients and executives in very high place. The first reaction is, well, you do it this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, right? Telling. Now, if you were supporting discovery, you would ask the question, well, that's a great question. How do you think the best way to go about doing this? Now, you see the difference in that. Now, they're being called upon to create something, to discover something for themselves. And the thing about that, when you tell somebody something, do you think they have as much buy-in on that versus when they discover something for themselves? See, they have more buy-in when they discover something for themselves. So we can spend more time on that, and think in terms of not telling, think in terms of asking questions that lead to a conclusion. And then we want to communicate for clarity and connection. We want to be clear in our communication, okay? And we also want to have connection. So what I'm talking about, we want to be clear about the standards, because we can't compromise on the standards. These are the standards. This is what has to be produced. I know you're working remotely. This is what has to be produced. So we want to be clear about the standards, and at the same time, we want to care about people. So really, it's really this whole balancing act from leadership, because we can't compromise on our standards, because that would probably go against our values and beliefs, which are part of our culture, right? And also, too, we want to care about people, because we want to, of course, develop trust, with people, and we're operating inside of a purpose, and that purpose probably encompasses our people too. So we want to make sure that we have both of these in place, where we are clear about the standards and we care about people. And you know what? When you're actually clear about the standards, it shows that you care about the people. It really does, okay? All right, so we won't delve into more about it, but we want to keep that in mind. And then now we want to create a sense of elevated transparency. In our communication, we want to let people know, hey, look, as soon as I know something that I am able to share with you, you're going to know it, okay? So, and we might not be able to tell the team members everything at a certain time, because number one, we might not know. Two, it might be confidential information, so on and so forth. But we want our team to know that as soon as we know something that we can share, we're going to share that. So we want to create a sense of elevated transparency. We don't want to have any, because what will happen is, you know, team members will go around and they will just absolutely make up stuff. You know, well, you know, I hadn't heard anything, but I think it's this. You know, right? And so, and so, I don't know. That's like a part of human nature. If we don't know what it is, we'll just make it up. Okay? So we want to create a sense of elevated. I tickle myself sometimes, but we want to create a sense of elevated transparency as it relates to our communication, and then we want to create a sense of elevated gratitude. Now more than ever, I mean, really more than ever, we need to have people get that we appreciate them for what they do. We really do. And I don't care where they are, you know, in terms of the level of the organization, everyone is important to making the organization run successfully. And I can tell you, everybody is having to deal with something, you know, in this COVID-19 era. Everybody is having to deal with something. So we want to create a sense of elevated gratitude for them being a part of our team. And we want them to know that they are valued and appreciated for what they do. So we want to create that sense. Okay. All right. So all of the things that I have talked about operate inside of what I call the winning posture framework for effective leadership. And if you can get this concept, this framework for effective leadership, you will be able to look and see at any given point in time, if you're not producing the results that you want to produce, what's missing, and you'll be able to put it in. Okay, that's just how powerful this tool is. And I have developed this tool over several years so that the people that I coach and that I work with can be effective in their leadership. Okay, so there are two foundation blocks in this framework of which everything is built on. The first foundation block is what I call the winning posture mindset of achievement. We talked a little bit about the mindset when we looked at Keenan's work and we talked about the hierarchy of consciousness. Well, that's a part of it. There's also what I call the 5 C's of winning posture. That's what my next book is about, the 5 C's of winning posture. And that has to do with conviction, commitment, confidence, character, and caring. And it takes all of those C's to make up a mindset that allows you as a leader to show up powerfully so that people know that you got this. You see, people are willing to align themselves when they know that the person has it, when they got it. And it really doesn't make any difference whether it's for a good purpose or for an evil purpose. Because you wonder, well, how could Jim Jones get 900 people to leave the United States, go to South America, drink poison Kool-Aid, and die in the jungle? Well, how could he do that? And the reason is he just shows up powerfully as a leader. And that's for an evil purpose. So the winning posture mindset is the mindset of achievement. Now, we're operating inside for the good of humankind. Now, we're not talking about what can make things worse in our society. We have enough people trying to figure that out. Okay, but we're talking about what's going to make us have an impact that's a positive impact on not only our team but also on the world. It starts, a foundation block is the winning posture mindset of achievement. And I pushed the wrong button. Okay, so the next foundation block is communication. We talked briefly about what communication is. All of the pillars that stand on top of these two foundation blocks are executed in communication. In fact, everything that exists in your organization exists in communication. Trust exists in communication. Your purpose exists in communication. Your core values and beliefs exist in communication. We as human beings, we have the gift of language. No other species on the planet has language. And our language is expressed through communication. Now, you might say, well, other animals have a way of communicating, and this is true. And they don't have the gift of language. Only human beings have the gift of language, and we express this through communication. So the leader has to have a solid foundation in communication, the ability to speak into the listening of other people, the ability to ask questions. This is necessary in order to be effective from a leadership standpoint. It's a foundation block of effective leadership. And then on top of these foundation blocks stand 4 pillars. The first pillar is the pillar of direction. The leader establishes direction. This is where we're going. And it's in 3 areas. It's in the goals and objectives, it's in the culture, and it's in the values. It's those 3 things we talked about. The leader establishes direction. And then the leader creates buy-in from the team to go in that direction. Dwight Eisenhower probably said it the best. He said, a leader is someone who gets someone to do something because they want to do it. So the leader gains commitment from others to go in the direction that has been established. And this is not conning, coercion, manipulation, because that would be conning, coercion, and manipulation. We're talking about gaining buy-in, which is the leader articulates the direction, the vision in such a way that each team member sees something for themselves in that direction. And that's what creates buy-in. And then the leader coaches, mentors, and develops the team members, the members of that team. Because just because someone has said, I want to go in the direction that you've established, it doesn't mean that they have the ability to actually fulfill on the direction that they have committed to. So the leader has to coach, mentor, and develop them so that they can fulfill on their commitment. And then lastly, the leader has to keep the focus on results. And the leader always is getting results through other people. If you're leading a team, you can just figure that 80% of you being successful is dependent upon the success of your team. And so then the way that comes about, the way the leader keeps focus on results is through accountability. It's through accountability, holding people accountable. Now, I know accountability has gotten to be like a 4-letter word, and it's not a 4-letter word. It's a much longer word. Anyway, though, accountability for what we create in this framework for effective leadership, it comes across as support. It doesn't come across as something negative. It comes across as support. And let me give you an example. Has there been a time when you really wanted to do something, like you really, really wanted to do something, and you were committed to doing it, and it was important to you to do it, and you didn't do it? Now you think about one of those times and ask yourself, if I had someone who was holding me accountable, like really not in the sense of micromanaging or browbeating or being a bully, but someone who was holding me accountable in the context of supporting me by not listening to my excuses or not letting my identity get in the way, but really supporting me and it being fully expressed in who I am. Would it have increased the likelihood that you would have gotten that done? Probably the answer is yes. And so that's how accountability has to occur from an effective leadership standpoint. And really, you can't hold someone accountable if they haven't, given their buy-in, because that won't come across as support. So many times I see leaders trying to hold somebody accountable and they hadn't bought into whatever it is that they're holding them accountable for. Well, that, as we say in Tennessee, where I'm from, that dog don't hunt. So this is the framework for effective leadership. We just touched on it real briefly, but I do have a free report that covers the framework for effective leadership. You can get it at andreboykin.com/framework. andreboykin.com/framework. So that's andreboykin.com/framework, FRAMEWORK. Okay. So if you'd like to get that free report, you can do that. Okay. So we talked about a lot, didn't we? We talked about those 5 dimensions. We talked about the mindset, like really mastering the inner game of leadership. We talked about focus. What is there that we want to be focused on? What quadrant in terms of what we want to focus on? We talked about let's focus on what there is to get done and not the crisis. We talked about being people-centered, like being over there with the other person, like really, really understanding what they're dealing with and their needs of, having certainty and relieving their fears. And then we talked about the results, not collapsing activity with accomplishment, but being clear on not only the what to be done, but also the how, and to demonstrate the how so that what gets done. And then we talked about communication, and we talked about so that there's an exchange of ideas and what there is to communicate to have us really be effective from a leadership standpoint. Okay, so those are the dimensions that we covered. Here's my contact information if you have any questions that you think of after we adjourn today. And so I think we have just a few minutes left. Do we have any questions that came up in the chat box? Let's see here. I see we have 3 things in the chat. We have, let's see, not sure we have any questions in the chat. Does anyone have anything that they want to add before we adjourn?
I took a lot of notes.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm honored to have you on.
Me too.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very comprehensive, that's for sure.
Oh, well, great. And my intention was that you find value, in there, and come away with 1 or 2 or 3 things that would really allow you to, put those in and, increase your effectiveness as a leader.
Yeah, I had seen that, the important, urgent quadrant.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's very valuable when you go to prioritize your work. I don't think most of us ever tend to think about doing that when we really need to be doing it, and stopping a lot of the interruptions that we get. Then we wonder why we're not accomplishing the bigger tasks that we really have set before us, but we are so wrapped up in a lot of the smaller things and going between different things, we don't tend to achieve or complete the bigger tasks.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. And I'm just going to, so we're going to get to you, okay? Because I'm looking at my time. We still have 4 minutes. Plenty of time, okay? All right. So there's a reason for that, right? Because what keeps us from operating in that upper right-hand quadrant is fear. It's the same thing that causes us to procrastinate. And, I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about that and would love to do that. But just suffice to say that what actually keeps us from operating in the upper right-hand quadrant is fear. And it's manifested in a way that we don't even know is fear. Because all procrastination is fear. And we could talk about that more all day, but we won't. Okay, so.
No, excuse me. That quadrant really made me notice why I'm fighting crisis and putting out fires more than I should. I mean, it's just that I'm not giving it enough importance early on to the things that I need to do to prepare, to plan, and to, and then by the time the deadline comes up and they become urgent and they have, and they should have been done, now it becomes a little crisis or,
Right.
And I just have to deal with it at another level. And with more stress on myself that's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, very, very good. You know, and it's the same thing. I don't know about you, but when I was in college, well, first of all, I didn't let all that book learning interfere with my education. Let's just start there. But anyway, you know how you knew the exam was coming, like
Right.
3 weeks ahead of time, right? And then you wait all the way to the night before the exam, and now you got to stay up all night studying for the exam, right? Right? Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing, right? It was important, but it wasn't urgent 3 weeks ago. And now it's moved over into the, well, I got to get this done because, you know, I can't fail that exam, right?
Right.
And so it's the same thing. But now when you look at, though, what had, and I'm just going to speak for myself, me not be working on that 3 weeks earlier was simply because there was a fear associated. It gets to motivation, you know, is in there, which motivation comes from the root word to move. And we as human beings, we're after two things that motivates us. One is the avoidance of pain and the attainment of pleasure. Those are the only two things that motivate us. So the pain of change, see, was greater than the pain of remaining the same 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Now, the night before the test, the pain of change is now less than the pain of remaining the same. So I got to study. Okay. And we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but that's kind of basically the underlying premise of that. And underneath that is fear. Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
What happens when the fear is sometimes driven by you don't want to overwhelm yourself with too many responsibilities because you want to leave time for your family?
Yeah. And so I think, Robert, what you're speaking to is the conversation of if this, then that kind of conversation, right? You know, because it's a conversation that's occurring that says, you know, I can't have it all. So I can't do this and this. It's like this or this. And
Right.
that's a conversation that's disempowering.
Mm.
So I coach people around, okay, so how can you have all of it and make all of it work? Because it's really like, that's how we expand ourselves, is when we are able to, you know, have it all. And so it's very much like, and we won't be doing this for a while, right? But imagine going into a football stadium and you find the row, and you know, they used to not have individual seats. It just used to be long benches, right, at the football stadium. And you find what row you're on, and man, it just looks all crowded, right? And you say, well, how in the world am I ever going to fit in there? And you go down to your seat, and, you know, somebody moves over here, and you wiggle on, and then you sit on down, right? Well, the doggone row didn't expand, you know. It was already capable of having you sit in that row. And so the same thing is true for most of the things that we look at in life. We treat it like it's an either or, and really another way to come and look at it from an empowering context is this and this.
Mm. Yeah, and having the fear, but pushing through it and trusting that it's going to work out.
Yeah. And that's an empowering context, being able to act in the face of fear, confident that the end result is going to come about. Another word for that is faith. All right. Okay. Anything else before I turn it back over to Robert and have him close it out?
Something that just popped in my mind, that, you know, that conversation where you were mentioning about the having it all versus this and that or that. You know, how do you you know, combine that with the idea that people think that they don't deserve it, you know, that I'm not good enough, and
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, Sil. So see, that goes back to the level of consciousness.
okay.
So they're like stuck in this stage 3, where their identity is being determined from the outside in, because who told them that they weren't worthy enough such that they would believe that, right? And now they repeat that conversation to themselves because it came from something that they interpreted from the outside world.
Got it.
I mean, a person wasn't born thinking I'm not good enough.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what it is. So, you know, I get into a lot of that when I do coaching, because it's exactly what's at the heart of that, of the identity, is the identity, you know, says I'm not good enough. I'm not X. I'm not loved enough. I'm not respected enough. I'm not whatever enough, right? I'm just not enough. And so then people go throughout, you know, day to day, I'm not enough. And that's what causes them, you know, they'll say, you know, I should have said something about that, right? I should have took a stand on that. I should have said something about that. And it's after they, you know, come back and did it, because they, in the moment, I'm not good enough. Who will listen to me? And so that's what there is from a leadership perspective, is to begin to break that down with your team, right? When you really become aware of that and really have them create a whole new context of being, that you are good enough. And if you don't believe you're good enough right now, believe me enough that I know you're good enough, until you create that for yourself, right?
Right.
Okay, cool.
Got it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, Robert, I think I'm gonna turn it back over to you now.
All right, Andre, thank you so very much. A lot of great information. I've been sitting here listening, taking notes also. A lot of great information. I am so happy and thrilled that you took the time out to be with us today for this Chamber University class and give us so much information that we can put right into effect into our businesses and into our personal lives. So on behalf of myself and our board of directors, I want to thank you.
You're very welcome. I was glad to be a part of the university this afternoon.
Folks, that's all we have for this evening on this episode of Chamber University. Please keep informed through our website and through our emails of upcoming classes. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.